It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Rico Brogna! How we all doing today? Evan Roberts, another brand spanking new edition of Rico Brogna. This is actually a sequel edition of Rico Brogna. If you missed our previous episode, when that got posted Thursday night, Friday morning, we were listening to David Stearns' press conference. David Stearns had an end of the season press conference, and what we've done here a few times on the Rico is we listen to it, we stop it, we analyze it. So if you haven't heard the press conference, you get to hear everything he said and then our instant reaction to it, and you can obviously have your own instant reaction to it. So we played, I would say, David Stearns' opening statement and maybe the first 10 questions he faced at that press conference. If you missed it, pause me right now. That's okay. Download, subscribe, and listen to part one. If you've already listened to part one, great. If you don't want to listen to part one, that's okay too. All right. You missed the first 10 questions. There's like 30 more. So you're good. We're all good. So let's get back to David Stearns after the New York Mets season unfortunately ended at the hands of the Los Angeles Dodgers. He spoke on Wednesday, and we're reacting. Let's hear another question for David Stearns.
And then, you mentioned seeing Pete here. Just, I'm interested to know, what were conversations like with him during the season? I mean, were you checking in about contract stuff? Did that come up often? Just what are those conversations like?
No, Pete and I, frankly, have never really talked about his contract face to face. I think those conversations are best left generally with the player's representative. But Pete and I talked about the team plenty. He's very invested in our group. Certainly was very invested in this team this year, and obviously got some enormous hits for us down the stretch.
Yeah, remember, part of the legend of this team was that David Stearns was meeting with the team after Francisco Lindor suffered that back issue to try to pump everybody up. Hey, we'll be fine. We'll be okay. And Pete Alonso decided to speak at that meeting and very passionately talked about, we got to party, boys. We haven't had a chance to party. We got to party. And luckily, Pete got to party. Pete got to party 3 times. He got to party after they clinched a playoff spot against Atlanta. He got to party after he was the unbelievable hero with the Game 3 victory against the Brewers. And they got to party a 3rd time after they knocked off the Phillies. They didn't party enough, but they did get 3 parties. So Pete at least accomplished that.
I know in this modern era of baseball, versatility is huge. But when you have a kid that's 24 years old that sees the opportunity at third base in Mark Vientos, some of the talk is if Pete leaves, maybe he might shift over to first. Is that putting too much on a kid who sees the opportunity, played well, his defensive metrics were good, to have to worry about a new position next year if that would be the case?
I think we'll cross that bridge when or if we come to it. I think Mark demonstrated the ability to play third base, did a great job this year. At this point, heading into the offseason, I'm certainly not going to speculate or comment on any sort of positional switch.
Yeah, there's no way David Stearns can answer that question, because if they are moving Mark Vientos to first base, it's because they're not keeping Pete Alonso. He's already said, yeah, we're looking to try and keep Pete Alonso. We'll see what happens. By the way, long-term about that, it has been a very safe assumption we've all made. If they lost Pete Alonso, they would shift Mark Vientos to first base. I push back on that for 1 second. While I can see why that would make sense, especially when you've got a guy like Ronnie Mauricio and maybe even Luis Angel Acuna ends up at third base. I get all of that. Ryan Clifford is a big prospect in the Met organization. He is a first baseman. The Vientos shift to first base may be a quick fix for a year before he ends up back at third base, or especially if the Mets aren't certain about Mauricio at third base, or they're not certain about Acuna, who doesn't feel body-wise like a third baseman, they could also sign a first baseman on a 1-year short-term deal. So I don't necessarily agree with the absolute lock certainty. If they lost Pete Alonso, Vientos moves to first base. I know why it makes a lot of sense on paper, but there are other reasons why that's not his long-term position, even if they did lose Pete Alonso.
a lot of money coming off the books this year. You're probably operating with more financial flexibility and freedom than maybe you've ever had before as a lead baseball decision maker. What's the opportunity in that? And then what's the challenge in that as well?
Yeah, we've got financial flexibility. It means that pretty much the entirety of the player universe is potentially accessible to us. That's an enormous opportunity. I envision us taking advantage of that opportunity and being aggressive in certain spaces. We also have to recognize that we want to set up our organizational pattern so that we can invest in free agency, invest where we think we need to complement the club on an annual basis. So you're right. We have a lot of money coming off the books. I would expect us to spend some of that, a good portion of that, to complement our team, to improve our team heading into next year. We're also not going to do anything that hamstrings us in future years and prevents us from continually adding, supplementing to our core group.
There's nothing negative about that comment, first of all. Number one, when you say the entire baseball universe is basically an option, that's still something we're getting used to. Now, we should be used to it because even though the Mets haven't literally signed everybody, they're in on everybody. All right, for the most part. I know that there are some Met fans still bothered they weren't in on Aaron Judge. I think that's a little bit more complicated. So that's David Stearns saying, yeah, we could be in on anybody. We've got to make the decisions that we're not, blocking ourselves from being able to make more moves next year or the year after that. I think what that essentially means, though, is while they could sign anybody, Corbin Burns is a possibility, Juan Soto is a possibility, Alex Bregman is a possibility, Max Fried is a possibility. It just means they're not signing all of those guys. Like, if you sign 5 guys to mega contracts, yeah, you put yourself in a spot in which you're probably not going to be that aggressive in free agency for the next couple of years. So I don't think anyone truly has that expectation that they're going to sign everybody, but I think that they are going after the top of the top. They have a lot of money coming off the books. I think it's upwards of almost $180 million. And even if you're not spending every dime of that, remember that figure is per year. That's the figure of this season. So let's say the Mets said, you know what, we're going to invest $110 million. Now, you got a lot of arbitration cases, so there are a lot of guys that are here that are just getting bumps ups. That's a lot of freaking money. We talk about Juan Soto, who to me is the apple of my eye, should be the apple of everybody's eyes, an all-time great player. He's making $50 million a year, in my opinion. That's still less than half of the figure of, hey, they're going to invest $100 million in this team or $110 million in this team per season. So it is damn exciting to think about the possibilities. And I think it makes it fun for us, especially when we do our off-season wish list pod. It is going to be we're going to be such big, fat children. I mean, our lists are going to be so disgusting. Like, I can see Hoff right now. I want Juan Soto. I want Pete Alonso. I want Corbin Burns. I want Tanner Scott. I want Max Fried. Okay, I'm good.
Well, are you looking at my list right now? Are you cheating? You have a camera in my house? The one thing I want to say, and I heard you and Tiki talk about this the other day, and Tiki thought some of these words that Stearns said meant that they weren't going to be in on Soto because they didn't want to handcuff themselves in the future. But I think your point was extremely valid. Nothing they do is going to handcuff them if they believe in if they believe in Juan Soto is the best player in baseball and they believe that $50 million a year is his value and they'll offer it to him. That's not handcuffing them. That's what we're prioritizing. They'll still get more positions.
Well, okay, so a couple of things about that. You're 100% right. If you value Juan Soto as a great player, $50 million you'll pay. You're not going to look at that as a hamstring issue. Not an actual hamstring issue, but that's not going to cause the hamstrung issue to occur. But also you have to look at this in like 3-year windows, right? So obviously, if you sign a guy like Juan Soto, it's probably a 12-year contract, maybe longer, maybe even a 15-year contract. So you're locked in with him. You're locked in with Lindor. No doubt about it. You're locked in with Nimmo for a while. Well, what about a guy like Starling Marte? Starling Marte is going to have 1 year left on his deal, making $20 million. That goes off the books. That's $20 million that disappear. Brandon Nimmo, it's not for a while because he still has a few more years left on his deal, obviously, but eventually over the course of that big contract you handed out, that disappears. Jeff McNeil is making $15.7 million. In 2 years, maybe less if they trade him, that disappears. Now, granted, there are other guys you're going to have to pay, Mark Vientos, Francisco Alvarez, but there are other ways in which money is going to start to get cleared for you. So you don't look at it as, well, I'm hamstrung. I just gave that guy $50 million a year. If he's a great player, he's worth it. You know, Francisco Lindor is no longer looked at as a hamstrung contract. Some people wanted to think that. There were some Met fans who are like, oh my God, what a terrible contract. Not when he plays like that. And not if a guy like Soto plays like that. So, look, I think a lot of answers you're going to get at a post-seasoned press conference, they're not going to tell you anything. It's not like David Stearns is going to tell us, yeah, we're going after Juan Soto. What's up? Yeah, we're going after Corbin Burns. They're never going to use specific names. So some of it you have to take with a grain of salt. But I think what he basically told you with that answer is we're going to spend. We may not buy every single free agent, but we're going to be aggressive, especially at the top of the market.
Do you have to keep in mind any of the luxury tax threshold numbers in your mind, whether it's the first one, whether it's the one that prevents your draft pick from moving back or anything like that?
I think, look, they all matter, right? Like they're yes. So the answer is yes. I keep them all in my mind. They all come with different penalties, financial draft pick compensation, potentially international market spending capability. So yes, all of that is on my mind and will play a part in how aggressive we are in certain spaces.
Yeah. I think what he's saying is I keep it in mind, like they matter. I'm not saying they don't, but am I going to blow past it? Probably. Definitely some of them. I think, look, it comes down to the opportunities that's in front of you. No one wants to minimize what those penalties are because those penalties can be harsh. Look, last year when the Mets had a bad year, their draft pick got moved back a considerable amount of space because of how much they spent. But I think for the right players, they will go over that tax. They've already shown that.
Just presuming that he does opt out, mutual interest between in terms of his coming back.
Sure. Sean's been great here.
Manaea.
And, not only on the field, but off the field as well. So yes, another player that would be great to have back.
Yeah, the question was about Sean Manaea. I know it cut off a little bit. This is very tricky. I think all the pitching questions are very, very tricky. How many years are you willing to go to a guy who on opening day is going to be 33 years old? How many years are you willing to go to a guy who is a year removed from basically being moved to the bullpen by the San Francisco Giants? And it's tough. And I think what adds to it is that he's a lefty because lefties are late developers. We've seen it with a lot of guys. So I'd be careful with Manaea, but I err on the side of I give him 3 years. The money I don't get nuts about. It's really about the years. So would I be willing to pay him for age 33, 34, 35? Yes. I think anything beyond that is very risky. You want to put some kind of team option on a fourth year, some kind of, hey, if you get to this threshold innings-wise, it pops up, okay? But it's tough, man. There's no exact science to it. I think 3 years to me is as far as I would go with a 33-year-old left-hander.
Just an FYI going forward, it seemed like the only person that had issues with the mic was Laura Albanese. I mean, everyone else seemed to be able to figure out how to work it, but whenever she asks questions, it gets choppy.
Why are you picking on Laura? She did nothing bad to you.
I think she's great. I don't understand why her questions came in so weird.
Yeah, that is strange. I don't know. We'll try to get to the bottom of that.
I'll ask her. I'll text her.
Yeah, you ask her. Here are more questions for David Stearns.
And where do you view if you know Brett Baty's role next year?
Yeah, I think that's to be determined. We still have a very high opinion of Brett. I think he is a player who continues to develop his versatility, ability to play multiple positions. And it's probably tough right now frankly, maybe even tough at spring training to know exactly where it's going to fit. But he's a very talented player. And as we saw this year, talented players can step up and take advantage of opportunities when they come and become big parts of our team.
Yeah, and, I didn't mention his name before, but he's certainly one of the names where if Pete Alonso's gone and they do make that shift of Vientos to first base, Beatty's a part of the equation. Where else could he be a part of the equation? I think he could be a part of the equation at DH. I think that it's very unlikely J.D. Martinez comes back. I would bring Jesse Winker back. I wouldn't relate them necessarily. I think Winker would be a big part of the outfield more so than DH. Starling Marte is a guy that never stays healthy. Assuming he's on the team next year, he does have 1 year left on his deal. You could have some kind of Marte plays, Winker plays a lot kind of going on in right field. So I think there are a lot of possibilities on how Brett Beatty can get at bats, but DH is certainly one of them, even if Pete Alonso does come back.
How do you feel about where your farm system is today compared to 1 year ago?
I think we continue to progress in the right direction. I think we're a little bit deeper than we were probably 1 year ago today. Part of that's through continued development of some internal players, and part of that's because we added a whole nother draft class, which is always helpful. We had a lot of injuries in our system this year on the position player front, and so I'm not sure we saw the amount of position player development at the top of the system that maybe we anticipated at the front of the season. But these guys are still good players. Some of them are playing in the fall league right now to get more at bats under their belt. And I would imagine a number of those players from a position player perspective who are generally towards the top of our organizational prospect rankings have a chance to really impact the major league team next year.
It's so funny, man. This was such a great year in terms of more success than we could have imagined. But what a disappointing year for the position players that we figured would be here before the season was over. Drew Gilbert and Jet Williams being kind of the lead names, and injuries had a lot to do with it, where it really derailed them to the point where I think Drew Gilbert and Jet Williams being on the team to start next year would be a big surprise. Luis Angel Acuna, very different. He obviously did get up here, did have some pretty good experience, but yeah, Jet and Drew Gilbert almost had lost years at the minors because of the injuries that they suffered.
Well, if you think about this, I mean, Luis Angel Acuna, up until he came up, which was when, like August, September, I forgot the exact date, there was no rookie that played for this Mets squad at all.
Crazy.
He was the first one to get called up, only one to get called up.
It's funny. Before the season started, at Odyssey, the parent company of WFAN, one of my bosses said, "Would you speak to the Met radio sales team?" Because he had heard me be optimistic about the team. Genuinely on the radio and on the Rico say, "Hey, I think the Mets are going to be better than people think." And I wasn't crazy. You remember what I was saying? 85 wins, 86 wins. They can compete for a third wild card spot. And he thought that the Met radio sales team had heard so much negativity. How about me as a Met fan telling him why I think the team would be good? And people from the sales group still say, "Oh, man, you were so right about the Mets." And I'm like, you know what's funny? I really wasn't. I was right that they were good. You guys did a great job selling. They were a lot better than we thought. But one of my selling points to them was Drew Gilbert's coming. Jet Williams is coming. Like, I had hyped up that a part of why the Mets were going to have success was the youth. So, yeah, I was right. The Mets were good, but not necessarily for the reasons I gave. And it's funny, Hoff, that you say that. They didn't have many rookies around here. That's for sure. By the way, speaking of young players, I don't know why this just popped in my head. We were talking about the bullpen next year. Dednil Nunez is a guy we should not forget. He was so good before he got hurt. So he's one of those guys that when you think about the Met bullpen in 2025, Dednil Nunez has to be a name you think of. So I don't know why that just popped in my head. Anyhow, here's more from David Stearns.
Other than Brandon Sproat, who are some of pitchers maybe that stood out to you who could be in the mix for jobs next year?
I thought, Blade Tidwell getting to AAA was a big advancement in his development. Noel McLean having a really nice year getting to AA. And look, we saw elements and certain starts, certain periods of performance from Vassell and Hamill that were also really encouraging. We probably just didn't see the consistency that they or we would have liked, but I still think there's something there with those guys. And so, those guys continue to progress. We talk about it all the time. Development is not linear. We don't know exactly when a prospect is going to figure it out to get to the big leagues, but we believe in all those guys.
Yeah, I think in fairness, though, I don't think any of them make the team out of spring training. I think that'd probably be a surprise. He mentioned Hamill and Vassell. They just didn't put up consistent numbers at AAA. Brandon Sproat hasn't been enough time, so I think it makes sense that he starts at AAA and could very well be in the major league rotation by May. Christian Scott ended up having such a quick rise this past year, and it's a shame what happened to him. I mean, Christian Scott's out for the year, in case we forgot. That's one of the big negatives from this season. He came up, he showed a little promise, and then he needed this hybrid of Tommy John surgery. But hybrid or not, he's going to miss the entire 2025 season, and that's, very unfortunate.
The last off season, it seemed like, based on your comments at winter meetings and at other places, it seemed like there was just that one big shot at a major free agent of long-term contract or significant money. Do you anticipate this market playing out differently in that regard for you?
I don't know. I think it's too early to determine exactly where we're going to take our shots. And so we'll continue to evaluate that plan and that path as we move through the offseason.
Yeah. Not nice attempt. Like, are you going to go after a couple of big time stars? My guess would be, and it's just purely a guess, I think they're in on Soto and Burns. Are they going to get both of those guys? I don't know. Would they be willing to sign both of those guys? I think they would. I don't think that's me being crazy. Now, if they did accomplish that, where they got the best starting pitcher on the market, in my opinion, in Corbin Burns, the best offensive player on the market, would they do much else? Probably not. That's where I think, and I think we'd be okay with that. I don't think many of us would be complaining that they signed Burns and Soto and didn't do much else, but he ain't going to tell us this. I mean, he's not going to say we're going after this guy or that guy, but we're not that far away from at least finding out the real rumors. Once this World Series ends, the rumors begin in earnest, and before you know it, the winter meetings will be upon us.
Also, last year you had obviously hit on Severino and Manaea. Both of those guys were coming off of injuries or just down seasons in some instances. Does their success and maybe the identification of those guys, training staffs work with those guys, increase the appetite for maybe going down that path again with other types of those pitchers?
Look, I think the ability to have pitchers come in and experience success here is important. Not only because it reinforces some elements of our processes and maybe helps us understand player identification or keeping players healthy, but also it proves to other players that we have a system here that potentially can help them bounce back, stay healthy, whatever it is for that particular player. So, ultimately it's a credit to Sevy and Sean that they put in the work and they were able to perform over the course of a year. I think those types of deals are always going to be part of our strategy. And so we'll see what's out there this year.
Yeah, I love deals like that because if they don't work, they don't work. And the guy's gone after 1 year. I think that if they hit on Corbin Burns, who is one of the rare guys I would be comfortable giving all those years and all that money to. I think that paying starting pitching is clearly very risky. And I got to tell you, one guy I've cooled on is Max Fried. I don't know if I'd have that same confidence in giving Max Fried a contract like that. Just the concerns that he'd be able to stay healthy. But let's say you got a guy like Corbin Burns. I would totally kind of finish my rotation by taking those 1 year deals on arms. The problem is finding the right guy. It's not just anybody on a 1 year deal. It's the right guy. Luis Severino turned out to be the right guy. He was solid this year. He was not dominant. I don't think he had a career renaissance the way Sean Manaea did. I think the career renaissance that Sevy had was that he was healthy. That was it. He didn't put up amazing career numbers. He wasn't the guy from 18 or 17. And I'm not criticizing him for that. I think it was great. I thought overall, if I'm grading Severino and we'll do a grading Rico, I'd give him a B+. I think it was almost as much as you could expect. But I thought the strategy of bringing starting pitchers in on 1 year deals and no risk deals, there is a beauty to it, especially when you see how often starting pitchers get hurt. I'm just saying that Burns, to me, is one of those exceptions where I'd be willing to give him the crazy contract and just cross my fingers that he stays healthy.
Listen, I do like the idea of the 1-year deals with certain guys. It's not like a Rick Peterson situation with Victor Zambrano, like, give me 5 minutes, I'll fix everything. Okay. But I do like the pitching lab. I do think that had something to do with how these pitchers developed this year. I mean, there was the last year we know that Severino was tipping pitches. The Yankees couldn't figure that out all season long, but the Mets did. The Mets figured that out. So that was part of the battle.
No doubt. Look, I'll give you a guy right off the top. I'm going to give you a pitching lab. I'd bring him in on a 1-year deal and be pretty excited about the possibilities. You want me to give you a name right now?
Give it to me.
Here's the thing. You're going to watch him pitch this week. And that guy is Walker Buehler. Walker Buehler. Yeah. That's just the name that jumps out at me. I know he's a free agent at the end of the year.
No, I mean, listen, he's had a rough go of it. Who was it? I think Smoltz was saying that he didn't look like himself. His strikeout ratio wasn't as good.
He's also coming off a major injury, and I think that we need to remember, like Zach Wheeler is such a great example of this. It took Wheeler years to get over Tommy John surgery. Years. It wasn't a year. It wasn't 2 years. It was 3 years, basically. And now he's the most reliable starting pitcher in all of baseball. Maybe ahead of Garrett Cole now, since Garrett didn't have the most reliable year. It's Zach Wheeler, Corbin Burns, Garrett Cole. Take your pick. It's a very limited group of guys, which is why I would be willing. I know we'll have a big debate about this as the offseason rolls on, but I would be willing to give that kind of mega contract to Corbin Burns.
Can I ask you real quick before we move on? I don't want to take up so much time. But wasn't there an issue with Corbin Burns and the Brewers? Now, was that before Stearns left or after Stearns left? But like, he really wanted to sign a long-term deal, and they were fighting with the arbitration nonsense.
Look, I think David Stearns was there, but they're a small market team. This is not a small market team. And while David Stearns was there, he runs a different operation now. So I don't necessarily think that would have any impact. Corbin Burns seems like a very analytical guy. I think I read a little bit about what he's looking for in free agency. It's the money, obviously. That's going to be up there, but a lot of it is finding an organization he's comfortable with. So the Mets may have to sell him on that pitching lab, sell him on Jeremy Hefner, sell him on, how they treat the families at Citi Field. A lot of important things. And it does feel like Steve Cohen and David Stearns have kind of helped turn that part of the organization around completely. Is there another question for David?
Just to follow up on that, I have 2 follow-ups, but to follow up on that, your track record both here and in Milwaukee, you've never really signed pitchers to long-term deals. How much of that was maybe just financial limitations in Milwaukee, and what is your appetite for doing that if warranted?
In all of these different segments of the player universe, there are no hard and fast rules for me. I really do think we have to take each individual decision, looking at the individual player, to determine whether we think a long-term investment is warranted, is wise, is the best interest of the organization. If we look at the history of long-term investments in pitchers, it is not overwhelmingly a rosy picture, but there are pitchers who have gone into their mid or late 30s and pitched very well. And so if we think we can identify that, then there could be exceptions.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Who wants to do it, but there are exceptions. And I think the debate is who qualifies as an exception.
And then just regarding the CBT, is there any realistic world in which you could or would go under it, completely reset it this year? Or just given the nature of your roster, do you kind of have to assume you'll be in one of those deals?
At this point in the offseason, I don't think it's fair for me to speculate on anything. I would expect us to be active in free agency. I would expect us to go out and try to improve this team. Where ultimately our payroll lands, at this point, I really can't say.
Yeah. That's code for, we'll be over it. But thank you very much for asking.
Hey, David, 2 quick ones. First, how are Francisco and Brandon heading into the winter health-wise after what they battled down the stretch for you guys?
Yeah, it's with both those guys, they kind of both battled through the worst of it while playing and ended the season in a pretty good spot. Brandon was moving pretty well the last couple games. Francisco said he felt mostly normal by the last game. So both those guys are in good shape heading into the offseason.
That's good to hear. Give Lindor a lot of credit. We almost forgot he had a back issue. I mean, it's crazy. Like, if you think back to the concerns that we all had, rightfully so, on that homestand where he didn't play, and the concern we may not see him play again, he not only ends up playing, he ends up playing so well and so effectively that we forgot he ever had a back issue. So it's a major credit to Francisco Lindor. Francisco Lindor, I think maybe more than anyone this side of Vientos, really defined himself with Met fans. Like, I think he's become what I like to call an unbooable player. There are a few Mets who have gotten to a point where no matter how much they struggle, they won't be booed. And I think Lindor did that. It was a truly magical 2024 season. He's not going to win the MVP. He's going to finish second, though, which is pretty rare in the history of this franchise. And I think when you factor in the back in his performance and all the big hits, just an unbelievable year by Lindor. And, as far as Nimmo is concerned, he was clearly bothered by the end. We had a lot of debate and a lot of thoughts about, should they bench him? Should Carlos Mendoza say, look, you're hurting the team, we're not going to play you? It was always something very difficult to do, especially to a core player like Brandon Nimmo, but he clearly was affected by the foot issue.
And you addressed it in your opening comments about the good chemistry they seem to have. What have you learned this year and in your career about clubhouse chemistry and how it's created and how it can maybe sometimes create a result greater than the sum of the parts?
Yeah. Chemistry is really important. Having guys who play hard, I think who genuinely enjoy coming to the ballpark is very important. It's not always the easiest thing to predict. It's not always the easiest thing to know exactly how a group of players is going to respond to one another. I think as an organization, there are certain things we can do to help encourage that, to be positive, to put players in the best position to succeed. But at the end of the day, it is something that's a challenge a little bit to know exactly how a group is going to mesh.
You have no idea. That's okay. I mean, honestly, unless you know somebody is a problem or can't play in a market, maybe the best way to build a team is just build the best team and hope everybody gets along and hope there's chemistry. Because sometimes maybe there isn't chemistry, but you win anyway because you're so damn good. And that winning creates the chemistry.
And when you look at 2024 overall, how you evaluate it and what you take it away from the 2024?
Yeah, I think we took a positive step for the organization. We believed all along that we had the ability to compete for a playoff spot, have an exciting September, October, and we did. And so I think that is certainly a positive. I think behind the scenes, under the hood, we put some things in place that will serve us well going forward. Still some work to do in those areas as well. And now it's our responsibility to keep it going. We enjoyed this run. Our fan base enjoyed this run. We have great memories from this run. It's also time for us to begin to move forward and see what we can do to build on this to ensure we have the type of sustainable competitiveness, true sustainable competitiveness that's eluded this organization for a long time.
Amen. Now go do it. This is a franchise that's never made the playoffs 3 years in a row. Now, they got to get to 2 in a row, which they've done a few times, and then they got to get to 3 in a row. So sustained success. Sandy Alderson used to talk about it, couldn't accomplish it. David Stearns is talking about it, accomplish it.
When you look Carlos Mendoza job for 2024, how satisfied you feel?
Yeah, Mendy did a tremendous job. And we talked about this throughout the season, just the consistency that he presented himself. His ability to be the same person every day, regardless of what was going on. And that was true when he and I were by ourselves in his office talking through things. And it was true when he was out here in front of you and the cameras. It was the same person, and it was a lot of fun.
He did a great job. I don't think there's any – that's the easiest question one could ask Carlos Mendoza. I'm sorry, David Stearns. What'd you think of Mendy? He's not going to say he sucked because he didn't suck. He did a great job. He had a good mix of analytics, of heartbeat, of confidence. Remember, he made that comment about Pete Alonso's final home game against the Phillies, right? That Sunday night baseball game, and said, it's not his final home game. He said, we're going to be playing on another home game. And that takes a lot of balls. That takes a lot of guts, because remember, the Mets not only needed to qualify for the playoffs, they needed to win a round. Otherwise, that was his last home game. So that one stuck out at me. And I remember when he said it at the time, and I said, I'm going to remember this, good or bad, Mendy. Bad, I'm going to say, you screwed up. Good, I'm going to say, wow, okay, you backed it up. And he backed it up. Carlos Mendoza was unbelievable, whether it's him or Pat Murphy for Manager of the Year. He did an outstanding job. And hopefully Gary Cohen is right when Gary said he will go down as the best manager in the history of the franchise. They got a long way to go. Gil Hodges was great. Davey Johnson was great. Bobby Valentine was great. Mendy, go catch up and pass all of them.
David, back to Pete for a second. Do you look at Alonso as a foundational piece for this organization?
Yeah, I think Pete has been absolutely a foundational piece for the organization. He's been a tremendous Met. He's performed at a very high level.
I'm sorry. That guy sounds very familiar who asked that question.
And he sounds under the weather too, but I'm pretty sure that was Moose.
Moose! He does sound sick. Yes, Pete Alonso is I think what Moose was trying to do was set him up. Like, knowing Moose, he followed up with another question. Is he a foundational piece? Yes, he is. And now Moose goes in for the kill.
And when you looking into free agency, where does it fall in terms of the line of what a player was and what a player is going to be?
Oh, yeah. Look, I think that's always the question. My job and our job is to put teams together that are going to win going forward. And so we'll continue to evaluate that, not only with Pete, but for the entirety of the player landscape and the entirety of our team. And we'll do our best to put a team together that allows us to compete next year and for years to come.
So his answer was, great question. We're going to try to figure that out. And it's a tough one to figure out because, I look at Pete Alonso, and the biggest compliment on him moving forward is that he continues to stay healthy. And isn't that one of the most important qualities you're looking for in an athlete when you're evaluating the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, depending on the contract you give that person? Can he stay healthy? And Pete has done that incredibly well. David Stearns has done a chef's kiss job at telling us nothing about Pete Alonso. I love him. I like him. We'll evaluate. We'll see. I mean, does anybody have a different opinion on how they think of Pete Alonso based off of this? I mean, it's just, David's very good at this. Maybe it's growing up as a Met fan. He just has the experience of, I'm not going to tell you, so deal with it.
Understanding that chemistry is hard to predict, would that ever be a determining factor in whether or not you pursue a certain player in free agency?
Sure. And it has been. Absolutely. Yeah. How we think a player is going to mix in our group, how we think a player works, off the field makeup, all that absolutely comes into play and can be a determining factor.
Interesting. I think that helps prioritize keeping Jose Iglesias. I mean, not only is he a useful utility player, but the chemistry factor. And think about this. The Mets have a lot of young middle infielders on the way up. Like, I don't know if they view Luis Angel Acuna this way, but Luis Angel Acuna in a lot of ways can be Jose Iglesias. He can play second. He can play short. He may be able to go over and play third base. But I think Iglesias still has a lot of value to this team, not only teaching a kid like Acuna, teaching a kid like Jet Williams as he learns potentially second base, but also if you think chemistry matters, because I don't think there's any doubt Iglesias had a lot to do with it.
And also, I know that a lot of the bullpen are. Where do you see the unit right now, and do you feel like?
Yeah, bullpens are tricky, and I talked about that a lot. That the bullpens evolve over a course of the year. The bullpen's likely to look different in August, September than it does in April, May, and for us that was certainly the case. I think ideally you'd have a little bit more continuity from start to finish in a pen. I didn't really anticipate turning over 80% of the bullpen over the course of the year. But that's where we got to. But I do think we have some arms that emerged this year that can complement Edwin, that can be stabilizing forces in our bullpen next year and going forward. And then, we're going to have to add some pieces as well.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, the overturn of this Met bullpen is nuts. He's right about that. I mean, I mentioned Brooks Raley from the beginning of the season and how much they missed him. I'm looking at the Met bullpen for Game 6. Danny Young was not on the team on opening day. Not that I remember. Phil Maton on another organization. Ryan Stanek, another organization. Reed Garrett was like up and down. He was on the train of, let's see what he's got. Jose Budo was a starting pitcher in the minor leagues. And then you've got Edwin Diaz. It's a very, very different bullpen. And I think what I would love to see, because I agree with him that bullpens are very volatile, and I don't love spending a lot of money on them, but I would spend for one big-time reliever to pair up with Edwin Diaz. One guy. The rest of it, you take flyers on. It's shorter-term deals. And the guy I have in mind is Tanner Scott. Like, that'd be the guy. You know, a guy who could close, a guy who's a lefty. If I'm not mistaken, I'm definitely not mistaken, he was traded midseason, so he's not going to have the draft pick attachment connected to him. So, and then obviously a lot of it's finding guys. And to David Stearns' credit, he did a little bit of that. But, I think one big spend I'd be good with. Let's see what Tanner Scott ends up getting. I mean, he may get closer money from another team, and that could price the Mets a little bit away from that. But just on paper, as you sit here and dream after the season ends, man, that'd be something. Having Tanner Scott in that bullpen next to Edwin Diaz. I didn't want to trade for Tanner Scott, but I always said free agency, very different.
Is the financial freedom you talked about earlier, does that make you any less inclined to operate in the trade market at all, or is it kind of business as usual for that?
No, I like operating in the trade market. No, we're gonna be open to every avenue of potential player acquisition.
Oh, yeah. And that'll be the fun one when we do the Rico trade idea machine and we come up with a million different trades. But, look, the Tyrone Taylor, I have to attach it to Adrian Hauser, but the Tyrone Taylor trade was a trade. And I think there'll be a few that we're not going to see coming.
Let me ask you, because I'm throwing this out of left field here. I know we talked about Jeff McNeil potentially getting traded, some other offensive players getting traded. Is Kodai Senga somebody who's tradable?
I think he's tradable. I just think that when you're already dealing with trying to fill so many rotation spots, it probably just doesn't make the most sense. It just means you got to fill another rotation spot. Are you down on Kodai Senga? Is that why you bring this up?
Oh, he's pitched on the team for 2 years, but how many games has he actually pitched? It seems like it comes with a lot of extracurricular. It comes with a lot of strategy to even get him on the mound. I don't know. Like I going into a year 3 with Kodai Senga, to me, it feels like it's a bust, and I'd prefer that bust to go somewhere else.
I don't think he's a bust. I think he had 1 year where he was hurt, and that's what this season was. He was hurt, and it sucks that he got hurt. Like the second one we saw. The first one was the spring training injury, and it was very frustrating, and it had us all thinking, oh, my God, this rotation was a problem anyway, and now we don't know when we're going to see Kodai Senga. But we saw him come back, pitch very well in one start, and basically get his calf shot. I mean, that's the way it looked. So I disagree with your assessment. First of all, you can't say he's barely pitched. This year he didn't pitch. Like, of course, I raised my hands. He had an injury-riddled season. It was frustrating. But year 1, he was wonderful, and he did pitch. He didn't miss starts. Now, the handling him with 6 days rest, watch what the Dodgers have done with Yamamoto. It's an adjustment coming over from Japan. And if you're not interested in signing Japanese pitchers anymore because of that, okay, I guess that's a different discussion. But I'm not saying no to trading him, Pete, because I'm open to any idea. So you got to tell me what it would entail coming back. But what I would disagree with you is I'm not down on him. Like, you got to be careful with how you use him. Sure. He's a creature of habit. Absolutely. I don't think this year, though, says now he's injury prone. I think if he had more injuries in 2025, I'd be more likely to say, you're probably right. So I wouldn't be in any rush to trade Kodai Senga, no.
I guess my biggest issue is I don't want to have a pitcher that we have to sit there and baby through when we could use you, how are we going to use you, how many innings listen, we do that anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, go through Minaya, go through Severino. They were working on pitch counts, they're working on pitching limits and stuff like that. But if Senga is going to now be somebody who first year had to deal with the babying, and now he's going to have injury prone, which you're right. This is the only year that we've seen it. I don't know if I really want to go and deal with that for another year.
Yeah, I also don't think his value is going to be high off a year in which he barely pitched.
Well, right.
So I would let him pitch. I'd have him be in this rotation. He may not be the A's come opening day. We'll see what the rest of this offseason looks like, but I'm not against anything. Like, there's very few guys where I'd say, no way, no how. I mean, obviously Lindor I'm not trading, but I don't think it makes a lot of sense. I'm also not down on him. Like, it sucked, man. He got hurt this year. It was terrible. I disagreed with some of the ways they used him, but that's not like negative towards Kodai Senga. It's more the way Carlos Mendoza decided to use him.
What's the status for Senga going into the offseason? Is this a normal offseason for him, or does he have to build up his arm?
No, this is a normal offseason, and that was important for us to get to for him. This is a normal offseason, and a very strange year for Senga. Lots of stops and starts, but having a normal offseason is important, and then getting him to a place where we're going to have a normal spring training is also important.
See, normal spring training. Good to see, and hopefully he stays healthy. I think that a healthy Kodai Senga makes the Met rotation a lot better.
And from a team construction standpoint, do you view him, you're going to use a 6-man rotation when he was healthy late in the year if he came back. Do you view him as requiring that moving forward?
I think for him, it's certainly preferential. For an entire starting staff, I think it's preferential. I think, we were able to get Sevy extra days of rest throughout the season, and I think that helped him. So there are going to be times over the course of every season I'm here where we go with 6 starters. There may be times where we're forced to go to 5 as well, but between off days in your schedule, being able to add a spot start here or there, there are going to be times where we lean on 6 starters.
I mean, David just told you, man. Forget Senga. As long as he's here, they will have periods of time where they go 6-man rotation. I'm not against the 6-man rotation. Obviously, the makeup of the rotation has a lot to do with it. So if I have an ace, I want to maximize how often he's out there. I'd want to pitch him every 5 days. But the thing I'm also learning, especially with higher expectations, which hopefully the Mets have, is you also want to make sure your guys are not burned out by the time you get to October. The Met rotation and pitching in general felt completely burned out by the time we got to the end. And that's not anybody's fault. Like, they had a great year. Guys were healthy. The Mets were in a pennant race. Like, what the hell were you supposed to do? Nobody did anything wrong. But in an ideal world, if you're really good, and hopefully the Mets are really good, you can cut back certain guys' amount of starts. And then maybe when you are in late October, they don't get burned out.
David, did you maybe learn anything new this year about Jesse Winker, and what's the interest level on maybe bringing him back?
Yeah, Wink did a great job for us. Was having a really good year in Washington, came over here, adjusted to a little bit of a new role. We asked him to play a little bit more outfield. He did that. When we asked him to DH, he certainly did that. He understood he wasn't going to play against lefties and was ready off the bench when we needed him. I appreciated the fire. I think our fan base appreciated the fire. And yeah, absolutely. Another player who contributed to our team and who we'll certainly stay in touch with.
Love to have Jesse Winker back. I described a little bit earlier a potential role for him, maybe a pseudo platoon with Starling Marte, depending on what happens with another outfield free agent. But yeah, Jesse Winker was a very good Met. I got that one right. That was a guy I wanted. I got one guy wrong. I don't know if you guys remember, but there were 2 players I wanted from the Washington Nationals. Jesse Winker, who the Mets ended up getting and was a fine trade deadline acquisition. And then there was a reliever. And I already forgot the reliever's name because he ended up getting traded to the Diamondbacks and was so bad, got DFA'd. So we you win some, you lose some. But Jesse Winker was a good Met, and I think most of us would want him back.
David, you kind of entered the spring training with a mission to enter the playoffs. Now, having been to the NLCS, what can you kind of learn about the construction of a team from a run like that and what it'll take to take the next step?
It's interesting. If you look at the 4 teams that were the Final Four this year in baseball, all constructed a little differently. And I think if we go back and look at World Series teams over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, all constructed a little differently. So what I continue to take to that is there's no one way to construct a championship caliber team. And teams at the beginning of the year, what we think are their strengths, what we think are their weaknesses, can often morph and evolve by the time you get to October. So look, I continue to believe that depth is incredibly important. I continue to believe that you're going to need an army to get through a major league season. We learned this year you need an army to get through a playoff series and a deep postseason run. These are incredibly taxing on players. And so I think it's difficult to take any hard and fast rules by looking at the teams that have gotten deep in the postseason. But putting rosters that fit well together, having depth, all those things I think are important.
I mean, he's 100% right. We always look for like patterns. There is no pattern. You just have to be good enough. And having a deep team is important. And he's right. Like coming into the season, did any of us think the rotation had a chance to be a strength? And for like the final 2 months of the year was one of the best rotations in baseball. So a lot changes over the course of, as Aaron Boone likes to call it, a long ass season.
Just piggybacking off of Laura's question before, Daniel Nunez, where is he now, and where do you see him fitting with the roster next year? Do you think will he have to compete for his job next season, or do you see him as someone who can slide right into the bullpen?
Yeah, he's progressing well from his PRP. So far, all the results are going well. I think we're looking at kind of getting him off a mound some point in November would be my best guess, and if that goes well, he moves into a pretty normal off season. And I don't know that I'm ready to commit to anyone firmly holding down a roster spot at this point, but Nooney had a great year and would certainly be a welcome addition to the pen.
He'd be an amazing addition. I brought him up earlier. Like, let's not forget how awesome he was and ended up becoming a key high leverage arm. Another guy they missed. Brooks Raley's healthy. Dednell Nunez is healthy. Maybe the Met bullpen is their strength come postseason time. So I don't know if he should be guaranteed anything either, because I think he needs to prove he's healthy and look relatively good in spring training. But Dednell Nunez was awesome for the limited time we saw him.
Just kind of a big question. Stearns had said that he wanted, not Stearns, sorry, your Stearns. Cohen had mentioned that he wanted the Mets to be the Dodgers of the East. How close are we to that at this point?
Yeah, I'm not concerned about being anyone else. I'm just not. I'm concerned about being the Mets. I'm concerned about creating the best organization we can here for the Mets with an identity that is uniquely New York and uniquely belongs to this franchise. And I think we start to do that. I think we've got some work still to do, but we set the building blocks in place this year, and I'm proud of that.
I love how he rejected Steve Cohen's Dodger ideas. Like, I don't need to be the Dodgers. Let's be the Mets. And he's right. You don't want to be the next of something. You want to create your own way. And you don't want to be LOL Mets anymore. You want to be the Mets. And whatever that means moving forward, hopefully it means something positive. We don't have to emulate the LA Dodgers. We got to be the Mets. And that means consistently good, developing young players, signing big stars, making big trades at the deadline. I wasn't supportive in doing that this past trade deadline, and I have no regrets about that. Like, there's nothing I look back on and say, boy, they should have bought that guy. They should have bought this guy. Yeah, in retrospect, if they're sitting in the NLCS with Tanner Scott, are they better? Sure. But you need to be smart at the time. And I thought that he was smart at the time. But I like him saying, no, I know Steve said we should be the Dodgers. We're going to be the Mets.
With Steve Cohen, there's no bigger Mets fan probably around. Did you find throughout the year that whether it was low times, high times, that there was any kind of emotional part to his decision making? And do you think that will affect the Alonso free agency?
We're all emotional. I mean, So yes, like, and there are emotion parts to me as well. We all want to do really well. It's really difficult to strip away all emotion as you do these things. Certainly, we try to implement processes that help us with that keep us honest. But Steve grew up a Met fan. I grew up a Met fan. That's always going to be a part of us.
Well, by the way, I took David Stearns almost saying, yeah, Steve's emotional and a Met fan, but what about me? I'm emotional and a Met fan. David's probably thinking to himself, I'm more of a Met fan than Steve Cohen is. Why are you asking about him? Let's see their actions and see how emotional they are. And I'm not saying that as a threat. I'm saying that because I genuinely don't know. I have no idea how he's going to treat someone like Pete Alonso, how Steve Cohen treats it, how involved Steve Cohen's going to get. It felt like Steve Cohen got involved a lot before he hired David Stearns, but maybe that's because he knew his general manager wasn't his end game. His end game was David Stearns. So does that mean he's going to fully trust David Stearns to execute his plan and his vision?
David, what did you make of Francisco Alvarez this season, and what areas you need to see improvement there?
Yeah, look, I think Alvy had a, if we take it in its encapsulation, a nice season for a young catcher in his second year in the big leagues, who we ask a lot of, not only offensively, but from a leadership and game planning perspective. And so I think he's kind of where you would expect him to be from a developmental standpoint for a young budding superstar. And I still think he is. In terms of the growth, I think it's incrementally getting better on both sides of the ball, understanding what opposing pitchers are trying to do to you. And I think he began to understand that as we got towards the end of the year. Behind the plate, being able to slow the game down a little bit, ensuring that we have a full understanding of how we want to attack hitters. And these are very normal developmental goals for young catchers. And I think he's done a tremendous job to get to where he is right now.
I'm very happy that Alvarez ended the LCS strong, because he became the guy to really whip up on. I mean, we talked about it on the Rico, like people demanding to bench him and sit him down for Luis Torrens. And he was at least able at the end of the LCS to finish strong. I thought offensively, look, defensively, there's a lot he needs to work on. I think sometimes it's too much about framing and not enough about blocking balls in the dirt. Throwing guys out at second base was obviously a major issue. I think a lot of it's on the pitching. So maybe with a different rotation that changes. But one thing that was very similar to his rookie season is that he is so streaky. He comes back, and in June, you can't get him out. It was unbelievable. And then in July and August, he's one of the worst offensive everyday players in baseball. And then September gets hot again. So, we saw that a lot in his rookie year. I guess we saw a little bit of that in the postseason as well. You'll want to see a little bit more consistency from him offensively.
Now that you've had maybe a few days to reflect on the season as a whole, what do you think it is that allowed this team to go on the run that it did? And what do you think it is that maybe prevented it from making that last step?
Yeah, look, I think first and foremost, we have talented players. And so what allowed us to go on a run is we have talented players who played really well. And held themselves accountable. Our coaching staff did a great job of putting them in positions to be successful, continuing to stay positive, and it clicked. And we went on a great run. And look, there are a number of reasons why it ended when it did. I think we probably ran out of gas a little bit. We had pushed our guys really hard from June 1st on because we needed to. Every single game in the regular season mattered. And then clearly every single game in the postseason mattered. And that's part of it. And we also ran into a really, really talented Dodgers team that was playing about as good a baseball as you could play in the 6-game stretch where we got them.
And we couldn't get a big hit with runners in scoring position. Like, can we point that out? Yeah, I mean, the pitching running out of gas, I get it. The Dodgers being awesome, I get it. You also couldn't get a hit with runners in scoring position. That was a huge problem throughout this series, and not the main reason necessarily, but one of the reasons why they lost the NLCS to the Dodgers.
What is your appetite for exploring longer-term deals with any of your pre-arb guys like Alvarez, Vientos, et cetera?
Yeah, I think we're always open. It takes mutual interest in those types of things, and it takes a level of risk tolerance on both sides. But those are the types of conversations I've explored and deals I've done in previous spots in my career, and I'm certainly open to it.
Let's see you do it. I'm very curious about that because I think when you do that in previous spots, there's more of a need to do that. Like you almost have to take that risk. I'm open to it. Like, we talked about that with Alvarez a year ago. Obviously, Vientos will be a new name. Talked a lot about that. David Peterson isn't pre-arb. I think he's got one. I think he's a free agent at the end of next year. Like he's getting closer to free agency, which is crazy. But let's see the Mets do that because that's not something we've seen them do. And you could argue they don't have to because they have a lot of money. And if they want to keep a player, they'll go keep a player and they'll just pay him.
What did you make of Jose? Do you feel like the results that he could possibly bring?
I think Iggy did a great job for us. And, from coming in as a minor league free agent, not making the team out of camp, having the type of impact he did on our team, like those are the types of things you can't predict. But he did a tremendous job, was a big part of our success this year, and certainly very fortunate that he was there to pick us up.
He is the definition of a surprise team. If you're going to be a surprise team or a team of destiny or a team that goes on a surprising run, you have to find that. And, it's not the same necessarily because I thought Gerardo Parra was a good player. But basically what Parra did with the Nationals in 2019, he had the baby shark crap, but also just like magic from a good, decent player. And that's what Iglesias supplied this season.
Where do you see Jeff McNeil kind of fading in after a weird year, struggles, and he was really good for a while, then he got hurt, obviously came back for you at the end of the season. Where do you see him fitting in for you guys going forward?
I think the great thing about Jeff is he can fit in a variety of places. It's a left-handed bat that can play a bunch of different spots around the field, can play them all at kind of an average or above average level. And that's an exciting piece. So he's the type of guy that makes roster construction a little bit easier because he can fit in a variety of places.
I agree that it is great to have someone that versatile. And I've always said that about Jeff McNeil. I'm over it. Like I am good and I am willing and aggressive and ready to move on from Jeff McNeil. I am. Now, what's his trade value? Considering he's owed $15.7 million. Not telling you it's a lot. So I'm not going to have some unreasonable expectation that you're getting a middle of the rotation arm or a back end of the bullpen arm. I don't know what you're getting, but I think it's time. I think it's time to move on. Was that the last question for David Stearns? Have we done the entire press conference off?
That is it. That is 42 questions worth of press conference for David Stearns.
That's why it was a two-parter, ladies and gentlemen, because it was back-to-back 1 hour Rico Brogna. So that's why we needed to split it up. But it's a fun exercise. And when there is a press conference, it's fun to do it. And it's fun to examine it and kind of give our own reactions and really dissect everything he said. So we hope you enjoyed that exercise. We will obviously go into much more detail on this offseason and really give strong opinions on what we think this team should do. We do appreciate you downloading and subscribing. Of course, anytime you want to communicate with the Rico, you can email us, thericob@gmail.com, thericob@gmail.com. We will have another Rico Brogna Sunday night into Monday morning, and we will give you our grades for this past season, how each player did, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And obviously, we'll start to look closer and closer at the offseason and our wants for what this team should do. Thank you very much for listening and subscribing to another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.